Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into a key area of Unit 1 business activity.
That's right. We're looking at Part 3, which covers the different forms of business ownerships.
But we're zooming out from, the local corner shop today. We're going global.
Absolutely. We're tackling Chapter 9 on globalization and Chapter 10, which is all about multinational companies, MNCs, their importance, and how they grow.
And understanding these two chapters, well, it's crucial, isn't it? Especially for building that solid foundation in business studies.
It's completely non-negotiable, particularly if you're gearing up for the IGCSE business exams. These are really fundamental concepts.
Exactly. And maybe most importantly for Paper 2 of the IGCSE.
Yeah.
The one focusing on large businesses. You just can't analyze those big case studies properly, discussing strategies, impacts, benefits, drawbacks, without getting your head around globalization and MNCs first.
Couldn't agree more. It's about seeing that bigger picture, how businesses operate, on a world stage.
And just quickly, for anyone listening who wants more resources on this or other topics we cover.
Yeah, you can always check out www.igcc-business.weebly.com. Lots of helpful stuff there.
Okay, so our mission today, then, is to really dive into these chapters. We'll break them down, look at the core ideas, and revise them so you feel confident using them.
Sounds like a plan. Ready to jump into Chapter 9, Globalization.
Let's do it. So this word, globalization, what are we actually talking about at its core?
Well, fundamentally, it's the increasing interconnectedness, the growing integration of the world's economies.
Okay, so integration. Like national borders are becoming less important for business.
Pretty much, yeah. Economically speaking, the world feels smaller. It means businesses aren't just thinking locally or even nationally anymore.
They're thinking bigger.
Exactly. They increasingly expect to be able to sell their products almost anywhere, to borrow money from banks, well, anywhere, to manufacture goods anywhere.
Right, and deal with customers and suppliers anywhere, too.
Precisely. Customers could be on the other side of the planet. It's this idea of a more borderless economic landscape.
Okay, so what makes that possible? What are the sort of key features of this globalized world?
Well, for this to really work, a few things need to be happening. First, trade, buying and selling goods and services across borders needs to be relatively free.
Free meaning less restriction.
Yeah, ideally minimal government laws or hurdles preventing businesses from selling stuff in other countries. Fewer barriers.
So things like fewer tariffs, fewer quotas, less paperwork, maybe.
Exactly that. Less red tape. And secondly, for businesses to truly operate anywhere, people need more freedom to live and work in different countries.
The movement of labor, that's key.
It really is, both for companies sending their own staff abroad and for hiring local talent or specialists in another country.
Okay. Anything else?
And third, well, the rise of the companies that can actually do this on a massive scale, the multinationals, the MNCs, we'll talk about more later.
So they're both a result and a driver of globalization.
Yeah, you could say that. They're the ones operating across these sort of dissolving borders. And the source material points out, recent decades have really seen economies opening up.
More trade, more cooperation.
Definitely. More trade, better communication, think the internet, and much more movement of resources, people, and money across national lines.
So technology and, importantly, government policies seem to be paving the way here.
They are absolutely major facilitators, yes.
Okay, let's talk about governments then. How do they actually help globalization? Or maybe hinder it? Do they have an active role?
Oh, absolutely active. Governments are vital. The source makes it pretty clear economies where the government is actually committed to globalization, they tend to do better in this integrated world.
Committed how? What do they actually do?
Well, they can actively clear the path for international business. Think about it from a company's point of view.
Okay.
If a country keeps its borders tightly shut, literally, or through complex rules, well, it's hard to trade with them, isn't it?
Right. You can't sell if the door's locked.
Exactly. So simply opening international borders, making it easier for goods, services, and people to cross, that's fundamental.
Step 1. What else?
Then, even if the borders open, governments can still put up trade barriers. We mentioned tariffs. Those are taxes on imported goods.
Making imports more expensive.
Right. Or quotas, which limit how much of something can be imported. If governments reduce or get rid of these barriers, it becomes cheaper and easier for foreign firms to sell into their country and for their own local firms to export.
So they're reducing the friction, the costs of trading internationally.
Precisely. And it's not just about goods. We mentioned the movement of people.
Yeah, labor.
For that aspect of globalization to work, governments need to make it feasible for foreigners to live and work there. If getting visas or work permits is incredibly difficult, businesses are stuck with only the local labor pool.
So relaxing immigration or work rules helps.
It can be a key enabler, yes. It allows companies to bring in talent or find workers they need.
And what about actually setting up shop? Like building a factory or opening an office abroad?
Another area where governments are key. A firm can't easily operate overseas if the host government refuses permission, say, planning permission for a building.
Right, or ties them up in endless regulations.
Exactly. If there are excessive, complex rules that make it super difficult or costly for foreign companies to set up and operate, that hinders globalization.
So a government that supports globalization would try to streamline those processes.
Yes. They'd relax laws and regulations that might otherwise block, restrict, or just complicate international business. They basically try to create a welcoming environment.
Okay, so governments promote globalization by actively lowering barriers, physical borders, trade rules, immigration rules, business regulations. They smooth the path.
That's a good summary. They make it easier for businesses to think and act globally.
All right, so we have this environment, potentially more open, maybe supported by governments. What are the big opportunities this creates for businesses themselves? Why do they want to go global?
Well, the general view, and the source material backs this up, is that globalization, assuming it's managed reasonably well, is largely seen as a positive force overall.
For the world economy, you mean?
Yeah, leading to more free trade, which usually boosts economic activity, creates more jobs, increases incomes, and hopefully raises living standards for a lot of people.
Okay, but zooming in on one specific business, what's the biggest carrot, the biggest opportunity for them?
I'd say one of the most important, maybe the most important, is simply access to larger markets.
Right. That seems logical, but let's really unpack the scale of that.
It's huge. It's a total game changer. Your company is no longer limited to selling just within your own country.
Yeah.
Suddenly you have access to a much, much wider potential customer base.
Instead of maybe tens or hundreds of millions?
You could be looking at global markets with potentially billions of customers across many, many countries.
Billions. Wow. The sheer scale is hard to grasp.
It completely changes the potential for sales. Selling into these enormous global markets offers incredible opportunities to increase your sales volume dramatically.
And more sales usually means more revenue.
Exactly. And if you manage your costs well, higher revenues should lead to significantly higher profits. If a business felt like it was hitting a ceiling in its home market, globalization just blows the doors open for new growth.
Okay, so expanding sales and profits potential is massive. What's another key opportunity?
Lower costs. Definitely lower costs. Operating globally lets firms achieve what economists call economies of scale.
Which means their average cost per item falls as they produce more.
That's it. And why does globalization help with that? Because having access to those huge global markets means they can produce on a much, much larger scale than if they were just making things for their home country.
So making millions of things instead of thousands brings the cost of each one down.
Precisely. Your fixed costs like factories, machinery, research get spread over vastly more units. Plus, they can often buy raw materials or components in massive quantities from suppliers all over the world.
Giving them more bargaining power for better prices.
Exactly. Bulk buying power. And then there's location. They can choose to set up production facilities in countries where operating costs are lower.
Like cheaper labor, maybe.
Cheaper labor.
So big one, yeah. Or maybe energy is cheaper, or land and rent are lower. That geographical flexibility is a huge potential cost advantage.
So they can make things where it's cheapest and then sell everywhere.
Or produce closer to big markets to save on transport costs. It all adds up to a lower overall cost structure. And lower costs mean you can either drop your prices to be more competitive globally,
or keep prices the same and just make more profit on each item.
Right. Either way, it gives you a significant competitive edge.
Okay, huge markets, lower production costs. What about finding the people you need? The workers. Good point. That brings us to access to labor. Remember we said freer movement of people is part of globalization? Well, that makes it easier for businesses to tap into labor pools outside their own country.
And why might they need to look overseas for workers?
Several reasons, really. Maybe the business is growing super fast and there just aren't enough workers with the right skills available locally.
A skills shortage?
Yeah, or maybe the country's population is aging and the workforce is shrinking. Globalization means companies aren't tracked by their local labor market limits. They can recruit from overseas.
So if they need, say, specialist software engineers or just a lot of factory workers quickly, they might find them abroad.
Yes, it helps them fill those gaps. They can find specific skills that might be rare at home and maybe find more flexible labor, too.
Flexible how?
Well, maybe different contract types or working hours are more common elsewhere. The source actually gives a concrete example from 2014. It mentioned a shortage in the USA of certain skilled people, computer systems analysts, mechanical engineers, HR specialists. Globalization meant U.S. companies could potentially recruit people with those skills from other countries to fill the void.
That really shows how it can solve a direct business problem.
It can. And of course, linking back to costs, it also gives them the option to locate operations in countries where labor, even if less skilled, is significantly cheaper. That helps push costs down further.
Okay. One more big opportunity that often gets talked about: taxes, reduced taxation.
Ah, yes. The strategic financial side of going global. Because a business operates across many countries, it often gets flexibility in deciding things like where its official headquarters is.
Or where it declares its profits.
Exactly, or how it moves money between its different branches or subsidiaries in different countries.
And how does that help lower taxes?
Well, they can strategically choose to base certain operations or register their taxable profits in countries that deliberately have very low corporate tax rates.
So-called tax havens.
Sometimes, yes. The source mentions Ireland, for example, with a corporate tax rate of 12.5%, which is relatively low compared to many large economies. And it mentions even lower rates in places like Cyprus, Liechtenstein, Gibraltar.
So by choosing the right location on paper, legally,
they can legally minimize their global corporation tax bill. And paying less tax means the business keeps more of its profits, what's called retained profit.
money left over after everything's paid.
Right. And that retained profit can either be reinvested back into the business for R&D, expansion, new projects, fueling more growth, or it can be paid out to the owners, the shareholders, as higher dividends, which makes the shareholders happy.
A direct financial win for them. Okay, let's quickly recap those big opportunities for businesses from globalization. Access to massive markets equals more sales and profit potential. Lower costs from economies of scale and smart location choices. Access to a wider labor pool for skills and potentially lower wages. And finally, the chance to reduce taxes, boosting retained profits and shareholder returns.
Those are definitely the major pulls driving businesses towards global expansion.
Right. Now, let's shift gears slightly from globalization as a general force to the major actors within it, the multinational companies, MNCs. That's Chapter 10. What exactly is an MNC?
Okay, so MNCs are basically businesses that have grown really big and have significant operations, not just sales, but often production, R&D, offices in many different countries around the world.
So they're physically present in multiple nations.
Exactly. They serve global markets using this international network. And importantly, they provide jobs and, hopefully other benefits in the countries where they choose to locate.
We can all probably name quite a few. The source lists some giants, didn't it? LG Electronics, Walmart.
Yeah, State Grid, China, National Petroleum, Sinopec Group, Royal Dutch Shell, huge names. LG was highlighted, I think, having 125 global operations back in 2016.
Wow. Across loads of products, too. TVs, phones, car parts, appliances. That global spread is the key feature.
It is. And their sheer scale is staggering when you look at their economic impact. MNCs contribute something like 10% to the world's total GDP.
1/10 of all global economic output from these companies.
Roughly, yeah. And maybe even more striking, they're thought to be responsible for about 2/3, 66% of all global exports.
2/3. So most things traded across borders actually originate from these multinationals. That's incredible.
It really shows how central they are to the whole system of global trade and the global economy.
And their numbers have shot up too, haven't they?
Dramatically. The source notes a jump from around 7,000 MNCs back in 1970 to about 78,000 via 2015.
78,000. Employing how many people?
Over 80 million people worldwide, according to that source. Their role is clearly massive and likely to stay that way.
Okay, so why do businesses want to become multinationals? What are the specific advantages for the business itself in operating on that kind of global scale?
Well, a lot of it builds directly on those globalization opportunities we just talked about. But now we're looking at the company that's successfully done it, that's expanded internationally.
And the end result is usually?
Generally, higher revenues, lower costs, and therefore bigger profits. That's the bottom line for the business.
Let's run through those benefits again, but from the MNC perspective.
Okay. First, and maybe the most obvious, is that access to a larger customer base. By setting up shop in various countries, they get direct entry into markets way beyond their home turf.
More customers, more sales, more revenue, more profit. That's the core growth engine, right?
Absolutely. Second, lower costs. MNCs are perfectly placed to really exploit those economies of scale because their global operations allow for truly massive production runs.
Making millions, maybe billions of units.
Right. And think about their buying power for inputs, raw materials, components. Yeah. They can buy in enormous quantities globally, negotiating lower prices.
Bulk discounts on a global scale.
Exactly. And they have that ultimate flexibility to locate production or other operations wherever costs are lowest, be it labor, materials, energy, whatever. Plus, they can position factories near major markets to cut down on shipping expenses.
So operating globally gives them maximum flexibility to squeeze costs out of their operations, making them super competitive.
Precisely. And that efficiency flows straight to the profit line.
What about their reputation, their brand?
That's the third big benefit, achieving a higher profile. Operating globally allows MNCs to build incredibly powerful, globally recognized brands. Just think of the visibility of Apple or Microsoft or Coca-Cola or McDonald's.
Yeah, those names are known pretty much everywhere on Earth. That must make entering new countries easier.
Hugely easier. People often already have some awareness, maybe some trust, or at least curiosity. A strong global brand is a massive asset. It saves having to build brand recognition from zero in every single new market. Makes attracting customers much simpler.
Okay. Now, we talked before about governments putting up trade barriers. Can being an MNC help a company get around those barriers?
Yes, absolutely. That's a key strategic benefit, avoiding trade barriers. One major reason companies become multinational is specifically to set up manufacturing or assembly plants inside the foreign countries they want to sell to.
Ah, so if they make the product within the country,
then it's usually considered a domestically produced good, not an import. So it isn't hit with the tariffs or quotas that the host country might slap on goods coming in from outside.
So if, say, Europe puts a high tariff on cars imported from Japan,
a Japanese car company might build a factory in a European country. Then the cars made there can be sold freely within Europe without the import tariff.
Clever. The source mentioned an example, didn't it?
It did. The classic case of Japanese car makers like Honda, Nissan, Toyota setting up factories in the UK years ago. A big reason was to get inside the EU market and avoid the trade barriers that applied to cars imported directly from Japan at the time. It guarantees market access.
A smart strategic move. And finally, that tax issue comes up again, specifically for MNCs.
Yes, lower taxes. Becoming a multinational gives a company even more options and scope to manage, and often minimize, its global tax bill. They have more choices about where to legally base their headquarters, where to register different parts of the business, and how they structure financial flows between their subsidiaries in different countries.
Letting them channel profits towards countries with the lowest corporate tax rates.
Essentially, yes. By strategically using low-tax jurisdictions, sometimes called tax havens, they can legally reduce their overall corporation tax payments. And as we said, less tax paid means more retained profit.
More money for reinvestment or higher dividends for shareholders.
Exactly. For the business and its owners, that potential for tax optimization is a very significant financial advantage of being a multinational.
Okay, so the advantages for the business itself seem pretty clear and compelling, amplifying those globalization opportunities. Huge markets, lower costs, powerful global brands, ways around trade barriers, and tax minimization strategies. But what about the countries that host these massive companies? It can't all be about the MNC benefiting, surely.
No, absolutely not. And this is where the picture gets really interesting and, frankly, more complex. We need to look at the impact from the host country's point of view.
Right. What are the benefits that a multinational brings to a country or an economy when it decides to set up operations there?
Well, when an MNC invests and operates in a country, it can bring some really substantial advantages for that nation's economy and its people.
Okay, let's break those down. Jobs and income seem like the most obvious starting point.
They are, and they're hugely important. When an MNC builds a factory, opens offices, sets up a research center, or whatever, they create new jobs. direct employment for local people.
Any idea of the scale?
The source gave that example for Ireland, mentioning over 80,000 people employed directly by MNCs in the private sector in just 1 year.
80,000 jobs just from multinationals in one relatively small country. That's massive.
It's a huge impact. And those jobs provide income for local families. When more people are working and earning, the overall level of economic activity in the country goes up, unemployment tends to fall, and that generally helps raise living standards. It's a direct economic injection.
And more economic activity, more profits being made by the MNC locally. That must be more money for the government, too, through taxes.
Exactly. That's the second major benefit, an increase in tax revenue. The profits the MNC makes from its operations within the host country are usually subject to that country's corporation tax.
And that extra tax money is useful because
the government can use it to fund public services. Things like building better schools, improving healthcare, upgrading roads and railways, investing in infrastructure, all things that benefit the wider population.
So jobs and income for people plus tax revenue for public services. Sounds good.
It is a significant positive, although it's worth remembering that point about tax havens again.
Ah, right. The benefit might be less if the MNC arranges its affairs to pay tax elsewhere.
Yes, the tax benefit is strongest when the profits are actually taxed in the country where the economic activity and the jobs are located. If profits are shifted to a low-tax country, the host country might not see as much revenue as you'd expect. It's a key nuance.
Got it. What about the country's international trade? How do MNCs affect that?
They can have a big impact, usually a positive one for the host country's trade figures. If an MNC produces goods in, say, country X, and then sells those goods outside of country X.
That counts as an export for country X.
Precisely. Since MNCs often produce on a very large scale for global markets, a lot of what they make in the host country gets exported. This leads to an increase in exports for the host nation.
And why are higher exports good for a country?
Well, primarily because exports bring in foreign currency dollars, euros, yen, etc. Countries need these foreign currency reserves to pay for the things they import from other countries, and also to pay back any foreign debts they might have. So boosting exports helps strengthen a country's financial position internationally.
Okay, so MNCs can turn a host country into more of an export platform, boosting its foreign earnings. Interesting. What else?
Another really important potential benefit is the transfer of technology. MNCs often operate using advanced technology, sophisticated production methods, modern management techniques, things that might not be common in the host country, especially if it's a developing nation.
And they share this knowledge. They don't just keep it secret.
Often they have to share some of it. They'll need to train local employees to use the advanced machinery or software. They might also need their local suppliers companies providing them with parts or services to meet higher quality standards.
So they help the local suppliers improve.
Yes. They might provide technical assistance, specifications, or training to help those local firms modernize their own operations so they can meet the MNC's requirements. This helps spread better technology and efficiency throughout the host economy, not just inside the MNC itself.
Like a positive spillover effect.
Exactly. And that links closely to the next benefit, improvement in the quality of human capital.
Human capital, meaning the skills of the workforce.
Yes. MNCs typically invest quite a bit in training their local employees, teaching them new skills, giving them valuable work experience, often to international standards. This is especially beneficial in less developed countries where skill levels might be generally lower.
So the workforce becomes more skilled and productive overall.
That's the idea. These workers gain skill working for the MNC. Some might stay. Others might eventually move to local companies, taking their improved skills and experience with them. Over time, this upgrades the quality of the entire national workforce, which is vital for long-term economic growth.
So it's an investment in people.
It can be. The source mentioned India investing heavily in IT education specifically to attract IT multinationals, who then further develop the skills of the Indian workforce. It can be a positive cycle.
Okay. One more benefit mentioned. Something about local businesses.
Yes, enterprise development. The arrival of a big MNC can actually spur the creation of new local businesses.
How does that work? Wouldn't the MNC compete with local firms?
Sometimes, yes, but it also creates new demands. The MNC needs lots of supporting goods and services that it probably won't provide itself.
Like what?
Things like transport for its staff and goods, maybe accommodation for visitors, catering for its canteen, cleaning services, security, maintenance for its buildings and equipment, even local shops or restaurants catering to the employees.
So it creates a whole ecosystem of demand around it.
Exactly. This creates opportunities for local people to start businesses to meet those needs. It encourages local entrepreneurship and helps develop a stronger local business community around the multinational's operations.
Okay, let's sum up the benefits for the host country then. We've got new jobs and income for local people, more tax revenue for the government, increased exports bringing in foreign currency, transfer of better technology and methods, improved skills in the workforce, human capital, and stimulation of local business creation. That sounds like a pretty compelling list for any country wanting to develop.
It definitely is. And attracting that kind of foreign direct investment from MNCs has been a central part of the economic strategy for many, many countries, especially developing ones.
Here comes the but. It's not all positive.
No, it's crucial to look at the other side. While the benefits can be substantial, the presence and activities of multinational corporations can also create significant problems or drawbacks for the countries that host them.
Right. Time to look at the potential downsides. What are the major concerns?
Well, one that gets a lot of attention, especially from environmental groups, is the risk of environmental damage.
How so?
Some MNC operations, particularly in sectors like oil and gas extraction, mining for things like coal or gold, or large-scale quarrying, often called extractive industries, can be incredibly damaging to the local environment.
Because they're digging things up, disrupting landscapes.
Exactly. These activities can lead to habitat destruction, serious pollution of air, water, and soil, deforestation, and long-term harm to ecosystems. The consequences can be severe for local communities and biodiversity.
Is there an example in the source?
Yes, it mentioned reports from Amnesty International about the impact in the Niger Delta in Nigeria. Allegations of significant, lasting damage to farmland and the environment due to oil spills and waste dumping by multinationals involved in oil extraction there.
That sounds devastating. A really stark example of the potential environmental cost.
It is. And it highlights the risks, especially when regulations or enforcement in the host country might be weak.
Okay, environmental damage is one major concern. What's another big criticism often leveled against MNCs?
The potential for exploitation, particularly of less developed countries. The argument is that MNCs, with their huge economic power, can sometimes take unfair advantage of weaker economies or populations.
Exploitation in what ways? How does that actually happen?
Several ways are mentioned. First, some critics argue MNCs might focus primarily on just extracting raw materials, minerals, oil, timber, basic crops from the developing country.
Just taking the basic stuff out.
Yes, and often exporting it with minimal processing done locally. This can be risky for the host country because prices for these raw commodities fluctuate a lot on world markets, leading to unstable national income.
Boom and bust cycles.
Exactly. Plus, if the country just becomes a source of raw materials, it might hinder its ability to develop its own manufacturing or service industries, which usually offer better jobs and more stable growth in the long run. It potentially locks them into a lower state of development.
So the value is added elsewhere, not in the host country.
That's the concern. Then there's the issue of wages. MNCs might pay wages to local workers in developing countries that are very low compared to standards in their home country or other developed nations.
Why can they get away with paying low wages?
Often because the host country might have weak labor laws, maybe no effective minimum wage, or trade unions might be suppressed or non-existent. This power imbalance allows the MNC to pay wages that, while maybe better than local alternatives, are still considered exploitative by international standards, especially given the MNC's global profitability.
And working conditions. Similar issues.
Yes, linked to that. In places with lax regulations or poor enforcement, working conditions in MNC factories or facilities can sometimes be poor or unsafe. Concerns about long hours, dangerous environments, lack of job security, these are criticisms that surface.
Okay, so low wages, poor conditions.
Right.
What about the tax issue again?
Okay.
We said higher tax revenue was a benefit, but is there a downside here too?
There can be. As we hinted, the actual amount of tax the MNC pays in the host country might end up being surprisingly low, despite large operations.
Wow.
Well, sometimes they negotiate very low tax rates up front as a condition of investing. Or, more controversially, they might use accounting techniques like transfer pricing to shift profits out of the host country.
Right. Remind us quickly how transfer pricing works.
Okay, simplified. Imagine an MNC makes parts in country A, high tax, and sells the final product from country B, low tax. It might have the factory in A sell the parts to the sales office in B at an artificially low internal price.
So the factory in A shows little profit.
Right. Then the office in B sells the final product at the full market price, recording a huge profit in the low-tax country. The overall tax bill for the MNC is lower, but country A, where the manufacturing happened, gets very little tax revenue from it.
So the profit magically appears where the tax is lowest, not necessarily where the main activity occurred. That definitely reduces the benefit for the host country.
It does. And related to this is the idea that often very little of the profit earned in the host country is actually reinvested there. Profits are heavily repatriated.
Repatriated, sent back home.
Yes, sent back to the MNC's headquarters or parent company in its home country.
And why is that a drawback for the host country?
Because that money isn't being used to expand the local factory or build new facilities or fund local R&D in the host country. The potential for that profit to stimulate further local growth is lost. The wealth generated using the host's resources and labor flows out, benefiting the home country and global shareholders more than the host economy.
Okay, that makes sense. A leakage of potential investment. What's the last major drawback mentioned in the source?
It's a concern about lack of accountability. The idea is that some MNCs are just so big, so powerful, operating across so many borders, that they can sometimes seem to be above the law, or at least harder to hold accountable than local firms.
Why would being big and international make them less accountable?
Well, they have enormous financial and legal resources, armies of lawyers, lobbyists. It can be difficult for a single national government, especially a smaller or less developed one, to effectively regulate or challenge them. Their ability to move operations or investments elsewhere also gives them leverage.
Particularly if the host government is weak or maybe corrupt.
That certainly makes it harder. The concern is they might be less sensitive to pressure from local communities, environmental groups, or labor organizations compared to a domestic company that's fully embedded in the national context.
Did you give an example?
The source mentions protests against McDonald's in several countries, the U.S., South Korea, Brazil, over issues like low pay, long hours, job instability, poor conditions.
Even a giant high-profile company like McDonald's faces these criticisms.
Exactly. It shows that these issues aren't just theoretical, they affect major global brands. But it also highlights the complexity. The source also notes that McDonald's did reportedly make some changes in response, like a pay increase in the U.S. and offering some employee assistance programs.
So pressure can sometimes lead to changes, even if accountability is a challenge.
It seems so. It's not always black and white. But the potential for MNCs to wield immense power with limited local accountability remains a significant concern for host countries.
Okay, let's summarize those potential drawbacks for a host nation. Risk of significant environmental damage, especially from extractive industries. Potential exploitation through focusing on raw materials, paying low wages, or providing poor conditions. Paying minimal taxes due to tax planning or transfer pricing. Repatriating profits instead of reinvesting locally. And a general lack of accountability due to their size and global nature.
That covers the main potential negatives highlighted in the source material, yes.
Wow. So comparing the benefits and these drawbacks, it really paints a complex picture for any country dealing with multinationals. A lot for governments and citizens to weigh up.
Absolutely. There are rarely easy answers when it comes to the impact of MNCs. It's a balancing act with high stakes.
Right. Before we move to our final thoughts, let's quickly test your recall with a short quiz based on what we've discussed. Listeners, see if you can pick the right answers.
Okay, quiz time.
Question 1. Which of these is a benefit to a business of becoming a multinational? Is it A, offering a more personal service, B, diseconomies of scale, C, increased cash flow, or D, access to wider markets?
Well, thinking about why firms go global, offering more personal service is usually harder for MNCs. Diseconomies of scale are a problem, not a benefit. Increased cash flow might result, but the core reason is D, access to wider markets. That's the big one.
Correct. Accessing those huge global markets drives growth. Okay, question 2. Which of the following is a benefit that a multinational brings to the host country or economy? Is it A, higher tax revenues, B, higher interest rates, C, lower government spending, or D, less competition?
Okay. Benefit to the country. Higher interest rates aren't a direct benefit. Lower government spending isn't necessarily linked. Less competition is usually the opposite. MNCs often increase competition, so it has to be A, higher tax revenues, which fund public services.
Spot on again. That tax income is crucial for the host government. Last one. Which of the following is a possible disadvantage to a nation that hosts a multinational? Is it A, transfer of technical knowledge, B, higher inflation, C, less competition, Or D, the possible exploitation of workers.
Right, looking for a disadvantage. Transfer of knowledge is a benefit. Higher inflation isn't a guaranteed or primary drawback. Less competition is unlikely. That leaves D, the possible exploitation of workers, which we discussed as a major concern regarding wages and conditions.
Exactly. That potential for exploitation is one of the key downsides host countries worry about. Hope you got those right at home. They really highlight the key trade-offs.
They do. Thinking about those pros and cons for the host country really gets to the heart of a major dilemma, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Okay.
Which leads us nicely into our provocative thought for you, the listener, to ponder after this deep dive. Given everything we've discussed, the significant potential benefits like jobs and investment, but also the very real risks of exploitation, environmental damage, and maybe limited tax gains, should governments in developing countries actively court multinational corporations, perhaps offering incentives, or should they focus more on nurturing their own local businesses and industries instead?
Or is there some kind of middle ground? A way to get the benefits while minimizing the drawbacks through careful regulation and negotiation?
It's a huge question, isn't it? With massive implications for a country's future. What's the best path to sustainable development? Attract the giants or build from the ground up? Or both?
There's no single right answer, of course. It depends so much on the country's specific situation, the type of MNCs involved, the strength and integrity of its government. It's incredibly complex.
But thinking about why a government might lean one way or the other, using the advantages and disadvantages we've explored today, that's where the real learning happens. It gives you that deeper context for analyzing those IGCSE case studies.
Definitely. Understanding the different perspectives and the trade-offs involved is key.
So let's recap. We've taken a pretty thorough look today at globalization, what it is, how governments enable it, and the massive opportunities it presents for businesses. Market access, lower costs, labor access, tax benefits.
And then we drilled down into multinational companies, the main players. We looked at why businesses become MNCs, the advantages for them, and then critically examined the impact on host countries, weighing up those significant benefits like jobs, income, tax, tech transfer, and local enterprise against these serious potential drawbacks like environmental harm, exploitation, profit repatriation, and accountability issues.
And remember, for your IGCSE exam, especially paper 2, which focuses on these large businesses, just listing points isn't enough. You need to understand the how and the why. How does access to markets lead to profit? Why might MNCs cause environmental damage? You need to discuss, compare, analyze from different angles.
That analytical skill, applying these concepts to a specific case, that's what examiners are looking for. Understanding, not just memorizing.
And one last reminder, if you want to explore this more or find other resources for your IGCSE business studies, do check out the website, www.igcac-business.weebly.com.
And keep mulling over that question, MNCs versus local development. How should a country navigate that? It really ties everything together.
Absolutely. Well, that's all for this deep dive into globalization and the complex world of multinational companies. Thanks for joining us. Keep learning, keep thinking critically.
And keep analyzing. Until next time.